Did you know you could turn a loss into a win? So get this. I'm going to give you a couple of different scenarios here. The first one is an RFP. The government puts out an RFP and you look at it and think, man, I don't think we can win this, but we really need to get on the radar of these people. I've been trying to get a conversation with their contracting officer and it's not happening for whatever reason. So guess what? You see an RFP that's not going to take up weeks and weeks worth of work, and you choose that one to respond to whether you can win it or not. Because guess what? You might just surprise yourself and win it. But let's say you lose. You lose the RFP that you knew you were going to lose. Guess what you can do? You can have that informal debriefing with the contracting officer and get pointers on how to win the next one. Guess what else? You can have a conversation with them about all this stuff. That is a really important point, because if you see an RFP and the RFP comes out and you look at it and say, well, we can't win this, so we don't respond, then guess what? The government hasn't heard from you, hasn't heard your ideas, hasn't seen them in writing. You don't have an opportunity for that debriefing. You don't have an opportunity for a follow-up conversation about the opportunity or other things with the agencies. You've lost all of those opportunities because you passed on something because you knew you couldn't win it. So if you flip it around and say, hey, we're just going to go ahead and respond. If we win, we win. But if we lose, there's all these things in our business development process that we can do to get intelligence out of this organization. Point in being was I had a client that just recently did this, and they submitted an RFP. They lost the RFP, and the contracting officer came back and said, hey, I don't have time for a phone call, for an informal debriefing, but here's a list of everything that was lacking in your RFP. And so now they had a bulleted list of everything they needed to do to correct the next RFP with that agency, and they won it. The next one, they won it because they had gotten that feedback, they'd gotten on their radar, and now they knew what to do in order to go out and win contracts with that agency. See, sometimes it's just something little like developing a relationship through an RFP process, through a couple of conversations post RFP, debriefings, that sort of thing, follow-up phone calls. He had some follow-up phone calls to say, hey, item number 3, 5, and 7 on your list here, I didn't fully understand those. Could you explain that a little bit? And the contracting officer said, sure, no problem. Because she had seen their effort in the RFP. And so a contracting officer who wouldn't return calls before now started returning their emails and phone calls because they had taken the time to submit an RFP. That changed the game for them. So that's really cool. The other thing is like RFI, sources sought. A lot of people decide they're not going to respond to this because they're like, well, I don't really need to respond to this. I'll just track it and wait for the RFP. But guess what? If you are responding, you get to add things in there. We call it ghosting. Josh has a whole chapter on that in the Insider's Guide. We talk a lot about ghosting from the perspective of, hey, let's say you're a WSB, an 8A, an SDVOSB, a hub zone, whatever. You can actually put that kind of stuff into the RFIs to say, hey, this should come out like this. We did this for a client of mine a few months ago that was SDVOSB and said, hey, there's at least 6 SDVOSBs that are currently doing the work at your agency for this. This should come out SDVOSB. Guess what? It does. So how cool is that? You get to influence those, but again, you get to build a relationship with the contracting officer because you know what? Sometimes that RFI, sources sought, sometimes it actually doesn't come out as an RFP and it just goes away. And so if that goes away, that's an opportunity once again for you to pick up the phone and call somebody up and say, hey, Susan, I noticed that, this RFI came out in the spring. You guys said it was going to come out probably in the fall. It's now the winter. This thing hasn't come out. So, what happened? Did it go away? And you can just have a dialogue with that person. You can have a list of questions, ask them other things, but you can build a relationship by showing some interest in the thing they put out. And that goes a really long way. So that's one of the ways, actually, it's a couple of the ways on how we turn a loss into a win. So whether it's an RFI that never comes out as an RFP or an RFP that you lose, it allows you to gather intelligence. It allows you to tell the agency some things about yourself and about that opportunity. And it allows you to just start that dialogue and build a relationship. And when people see that you're engaging at that level, there's this law of reciprocity that often kicks in where they just go the extra mile and they'll have the conversation with you. So try that. If you have questions about it, as always, you know how to reach me. We'll see you next time.